What's up, guys? This is BenImparts here, where I break down cryptids, their sightings, their possibilities, what they could or could not be, and if they're real or not. And thank you for coming to episode 27. We've had some amazing feedback so far. I love reading everyone's suggestions. I love doing them. And today, we've got a very interesting cryptid here. Some people believe it's more of an animal. I believe it's a spirit, aka a jinn, based on its behaviour. But since many regard it as a cryptid in the flesh and blood sense, I am going to include it, like many others, in this podcast. And today we've got the Garappa, a creature in quotes from Japanese folklore. And the Garappa shouldn't be mistaken with the Kappa, which is another local Japanese being, but this one actually lives on the islands of Kyushu in southern Japan, so it's different from the Kappa. So what is the Garappa? Well, the Garappa is a being described as having the limbs of a frog or a monkey, the shell of a tortoise, a beak like a duck, long black hair, and a bony plate on top of its head, which sometimes is said to look like a dish. So this is a very bizarre, rather striking looking creature, and obviously partly because of this and partly because of its natural shyness, it stays away from humans because humans will absolutely try and catch it. The Garappa is said to be a shy creature, a solitary creature. It actively tries to stay away from humans. They live in communities in a sense, but generally tend to live solitary on their own. And they tend to be aquatic. They inhabit sparsely populated rivers and ponds, and they can often be found there if you look hard enough. They are actively trying to avoid you detecting them, but if you do detect them, they can be found. However, they much more often tend to be heard as opposed to seen. You can hear them emitting calls, you can hear them maybe occasionally talking. In spite of their shyness, however, they can often be very mischievous, and they'll often play pranks on humans. They'll make noises to confuse humans, they'll come up behind humans and tickle humans, they'll lure humans down wrong paths. Not necessarily in an evil way, they're not out and out Satanists, but what they like to do is they like to cause mischief among people. They enjoy confusing humans, they like disorienting humans, and they are sentient beings that can speak. They are living creatures. They are creatures that are alive. They can talk much like people can. They can communicate much like people can. They can understand complex instructions much like people can. And this is proven by the fact that even though they are mischievous, they can actually be very dedicated to keeping their word. Because if you will be found by a Garappa, it will challenge you to a wrestling match. Now, the Garappa is incredibly strong, and it will very easily overpower you. However, on the rare occasion that you can outbest a Garappa in a wrestling match, or beat it in some other kind of contest, maybe a game of wits, a game of words, it is dedicated to keeping its promises. So if you capture it or you best it, you will be able to make it promise to stop drowning people, which it occasionally does, stop playing pranks, stop making noises in the woods to confuse people, stop stealing things from people's houses, and they will agree. Because they are so dedicated to keeping their word, they will absolutely agree to these terms even if they don't like them, and they will actually do better. As a result, certain Shinto sects that revere them have worked for centuries to earn promises for them to cease doing evil, and as a result, Garappa attacks have become less and less common. And sightings have become less and less common because they're staying more and more away from people as a result, because when their friends get caught and tell them they have to keep that promise, many of the bad ones don't want to keep that promise, so they stay away from humans more. But some of the good ones actually will help humans by catching fish, planting rice fields, and they actually taught, if you can believe this, the ancient people of Kyushu how to make poultices. So some of the good ones not only recognise us, respect us, and acknowledge us, but actually help us out over time, possibly in no small part due to the work of those Shinto sects. Despite that, though, Garappas are still largely, generally, solitary creatures that wander between rivers, fields, mountains, live in small groups, or mainly just ride solo. And one of the ways you can tell that a Garappa is around, even if you won't see it due to its shyness, is that you hear a hyo, hyo call and a fun, fun, fun. So they've got either a call that's emitted 2 times and has a gap, or is emitted 3 times and is linked together. Another way you might also know if a Garappa is around, not so nice, is that they tend to lust after human women. They tend to find them very attractive, very alluring. They're very drawn to them, and more often than not, they will not ask permission. A Garappa will absolutely go after a woman and assault her. Now, from the woman's perspective, if a Garappa came up and asked her to have a liaison and she agreed, I'm sure that she would probably, depending on her beliefs, think that was all well and good and have no problem with it. But the thing is, these Garappas don't ask. They're very lustful, they're very powerful. Whatever they want, they have to get. And they get very inflamed by passion and they absolutely rape women. So women tend to avoid them. Women tend to not to want to be around them. Women tend to rightfully be wary of these Garappas because they don't have many inhibitions in that regard. And what distinguishes them physically from the Kappa? Well, the Kappa has longer limbs. A Garappa's limbs are much longer. When a Garappa sits down, the knees go right above the head, and the Garappa are naturally taller and more upright, even though their behaviour is generally the same. But what are these Garappas? Well, I obviously think they're a spirit, because, they have a very sentient human-like intelligence, but at the same time they're not people. You find in English tradition stories of hobbs, pixies and fairies that are very temperamental, can be problematic, can be mischievous, but will often make bargains with you and will agree to do good. You find the Siguanaba in South America that will often attack people, but if you are doing good, will leave you alone. You have the other traditions of the Kappas in Japan, you have the Kelpies and the water spirits in Ireland. I believe that you have these genies, aka spirit guides, aka nature spirits, aka jinns in every community worldwide, and some of them are good and some of them are bad, and some of them don't see themselves as good or bad, they just see themselves as doing their own thing. And I think this is linked to why the Garappa goes after women, because spirits are beings of energy, aka fire, and fire is passionate and burns fiercely and is particularly something that inflames. And I think that this is the reason why these Garappas attack women, because they're absolutely inflamed by passion, they get carried away by their emotions, much more than people do, who are not energy based, but are based on physical forms. So I think that this accounts for the fact that the Garappa tends to be more hostile towards us. But what do you guys think? Have any of you ever seen a Garappa, heard of a Garappa? Do any of you know anything about them? It would be amazing if you could post that in the comment section below. I will try to cover that as absolute best I can. As always, I hope you stay tuned for episode 28, and thank you for listening to this podcast.